2 minutes of, hi, I've just woken up this morning. So I guess there's a couple of clarifications. I'm not a full professor yet, so just have to put that out there before people get cross. And I'm actually not an epidemiologist, I'm a microbiologist. Very easy to get confused because these are all just jargony words, right? But it's kind of interesting. So it's really amazing that you recognize the bringing your whole self, because that has been something that has been a really important thing to me. When I kind of joined social media many years ago as a scientist, what I wanted to show was that I wasn't just a scientist, I was a mother, I was a Lego fiend, I love baking, I love cycling, and I wanted to show that, that I was a whole person, that I had all these other strings to my bow, not just being a scientist. And I think that's really important for all of us, right? I mean, I've done collaborations with artists, all of these things are important to me, and I wanted to show me as a person. It's been really interesting because during COVID-19, some people really, really loved that, and others really hated it. So a lot of times I thought, just stop with the baking and give us the science. And I was like, no, goddammit, I made these muffins, you're gonna see a picture of them. So it's kind of a really interesting, and I'm really grateful that you brought that up, because I think it's a really important thing, and it's something that I don't think we do enough of, because people seem to want the kind of one-dimensional, and we have to show that there's more to us than that. So, yes, looking forward to our Q&A, and I do apologize, I'm a little bit sleep-deprived.
Well, Siouxsie, it's actually a privilege to sit next to you. I was watching many of the broadcasts during the lockdown and thought, wow, she's incredible. And then a bolt out of the blue, you don't know us from a bar of soap, but we know you really well. I thought you'd be amazing, so thank you for joining us today. So what we've got this morning is we have collated some questions from our WIN network and our Emerging Talent network about things the members would like to ask you. And then when we finish those questions, we're going to go out to the audience. So this is Siouxsie. This is your opportunity to ask anything you ever wanted. Well, within reason. So get busy, because we're going to be looking for some questions after we've finished. So, Siouxsie, the first question I have for you. The academic health sciences sector faces similar challenges to the infrastructure sector in improving diversity. What successes have you observed in your career that you think are relevant and could be applied to the infrastructure sector?
That's a great question. It's a hard question too, because I spend my time focusing on things that are wrong rather than the things that we get right. And as somebody who's had a growing profile, I get people coming to me with their stories. So I was reflecting on this with a colleague last night, that somebody was saying to us, my daughter wants to come and study at the University of Auckland. Is it a good place? And we were like, well, actually, everywhere's got its bad stories, and we hear them because people come to us with their bad stories. So, which is a very roundabout way of saying we've all got a long way to go. And I think that, so in the medical and health sciences, we were a really good example of what happens when you focus on stuffing the pipeline with people rather than dealing with the really intrinsic, entrenched kind of things that make people leave. So in my career, in my field, basically science is a very, very unstable thing until you get a permanent position. And so in medical and health sciences, we have plenty of women who will do their degrees, will do their PhDs, will do what we call a postdoc, so that's their kind of post-PhD training, and then they really don't progress much further. There are very few women in more senior positions. And even in my own department, we had 3 retirees recently. We have something like a pool of 25 women, I think, were of these postdocs, and we had 5 men, and the 3 positions went to men. And it's just really depressing when you see these things, because it's like, gosh, we continue to stuff the pipe and go, we'll make all these awards for young people and do nothing about the intrinsic uncertainties of how they get a permanent position and stuff. And so I think biology in particular is kind of a really good example of this, where, you know, there are other fields like chemistry and physics which are still just like, well, they're just trying to get parity at the bottom of the pipeline, right? But again, by not fixing the things that are broken, then you don't give those women or other people place to go. And so what we need to do is fix the place, right? Fix our institutions. And what really worries me is we have these incredible projects, like we have the a Women in Leadership team and stuff. And every year, what it does, it creates a great network of women who can support each other, but it doesn't change anything. It's just a way for the university to go, well, we're doing that. We've got this network, right? What it does is it lifts individual people. It kind of relies on the benevolence of strangers for them then to succeed, but it doesn't change things fundamentally for everybody. So we've still got a long way to go, and I actually don't know how we fix it other than just poking and going, no, that's not good enough. So yeah, I kind of don't feel like we have success stories because we aren't. What we should be doing is big cluster hires of young, dynamic Pacifica Māori academics, right? But we don't do that. We need a whole cluster of retirees. We need to replace them with large numbers who then feel supported because there's more of them rather than just one person coming in who isn't supported. So that's what I'm kind of advocating for, but we aren't doing.
Well, do you know what? There are parallels because 5 years ago, I think we could have counted the number of women attending this conference on one hand. I know last year around 30% of our delegates were women, and look what we've got today. But the other thing we've got today, and it's probably the most important thing, is that we have male champions in the room. For me, that is the changing point because we can talk to each other until we're blue in the face. But unless the leaders of the industry, who are now still typically male, can support and be champions and allies to lift others up, it's never going to change. So for all the men in the room, for all the young leaders, this is on you. I hope you've got broad shoulders, but thank you for supporting this today, because until we have that critical mass coming from the top, we are not going to see change.
And the really, really, really depressing thing is if you're a woman advocating for change, you're a trouble. And if you're a man advocating for change, you're a hero. And so you can get the same things being done by people, and for one you're rewarded, and for another you're ostracized. And that's really sad.
Yeah. Now, Siouxsie, moving along to the next question. Earlier this year, there was a story published by Forbes noting that the countries who were best managing the pandemic were led by women. So that was New Zealand, Taiwan, Germany, and some Nordic countries. The USA also elected its first ever vice female president this year. How have your experience as a woman in health sciences and as a mother influenced your leadership style?
That's a great question, because I guess you never know what you'd be like as somebody else, right? You're just kind of you. And I never really saw myself as a leader. I still feel a little bit uncomfortable with that title. And I guess the reason is because we all have inherent biases about what the word means, right? When we think of the word leader, maybe up until a few years ago, we would have had a particular picture of it. I mean, now here in New Zealand, and you're right, these other countries, there are people. They don't necessarily have to be women, but they just so happen to be mostly women at the moment, but who show a different style of leadership. They're compassionate, they're kind. These things are not seen as weaknesses. They're actually seen as huge strengths. And this is not the domain of women. Like, it's kind of traditionally seen that way, but women don't, and that's partly, I guess, because of toxic masculinity and the way we, treat young boys growing up, right? That they have to be powerful, they have to be all these awful adjectives you find on their t-shirts, whereas, young girls are all unicorns and twinkly stars or something, right? So this stuff starts really early. But, there are compassionate men leaders, just not very many of them. And I guess we have to, we've got a big job ahead of us of kind of socially destructing, is that the right word? Socially deconstructing the things that enforce this kind of, there is one style of leadership, which is the sort of strong man and everything else is weakness. Because what we see is that actually compassion and kindness are really, really, really important. And the countries that are doing really well are those that are thinking about looking after each other rather than just this, mad, just the privileged survive, which is just awful.
So we now have a question from our emerging talent group. This question is, New Zealand has historically seen many of its brightest young professionals head overseas in their late 20s to gain further experience in their field before returning back home. The pandemic has accelerated the return home of many of these Kiwis. How can we capture on this reverse brain drain, and should we be concerned about the potential lack of Kiwis that will move overseas in the next couple of years due to the ongoing uncertainty from COVID?
So I want to just address this whole you have to go overseas to get experience bullshit, because it's a little bit like thinking we're not good enough. I mean, I have to say I've benefited from this because I'm in New Zealand because I met my Kiwi husband because he went overseas to study, and then he met me and he brought me back. So I would say it has benefits, but that's just because I'm one of the recipients of it. But when we and we do this in science too, right? You do your PhD. So we basically spend incredible amounts of money and energy training people, and then we send them overseas when they're at their most productive, when actually they could be giving back an amazing amount to the country. We send them away. And then we hope at some point they might come back, but actually there's no jobs for them. It's just, so it's bullshit. But it's also incredibly discriminatory because it discriminates against those who cannot, for whatever reason, go overseas, whether that's family ties, So this idea that people should be, have to go overseas to get experience, I think is just nonsense, and we should stop that. I mean, I think it's great that we're going to benefit enormously from people coming home. But I really worry that we end up with people in my fields where you'd be considered less attractive for a job if you hadn't had experience overseas. But you may well, for many reasons, that will have been an impossibility for you. Why? And they are incredible people that contribute huge amounts. Why should they not? Why should they not be treated the same? So I think we will benefit from people coming back. But I fight against that they should go in the first place. I think we just need to stop thinking, it's just, again, so interesting that we benchmark ourselves against other countries. Why? What's so great about other places? Why can we not just do our own thing and the thing that's rooted here and right for us? Why do we have to think about, and especially given some of the countries we do bench ourselves against, you're like, gosh, really? You want to be like them?
Well, I think given our success recently, I think we're quite happy to be in New Zealand, right?
Well, and we've shown here we can believe in ourselves. We can back ourselves, and we can be an exemplar. So why don't we capitalize on that and do the stuff that we know needs fixing, that's going to set us up really well for the future pandemics and for climate change, and show that we can do it. Doesn't matter how small we are. In fact, the fact that we're small kind of means that we're at an advantage. Yeah. So why don't we just kind of capitalize on that, I think.
Small but mighty.
And nimble.
Yes.
That's the kind of important thing.
Now, I've got a question here that says, how do you cope when you're the only one in the room that's like you? How do you, when you don't look like anybody else in the room?
It's usually.
Yeah.
Well, the great thing about my hair is if it's back over my shoulders, I don't see it. So it's kind of funny that, and it's been like this for a long time. So it's like 20 odd years. So it's, but it's funny. There are some times when I see a photo and I'm like, oh gosh, it's quite bright, isn't it? I never really did it for that reason. But what's kind of interesting is that, so I dyed my hair. In fact, I've been many colors, but settled on this color about 20 years ago. Because I like it, because it's just an expression of who I am. I'm not quite sure what it's expressing, but it's an expression of who I am. And yet, several times in my career, it has almost cost me something, a job, or, there's a couple of times where I basically, so this was sort of pre-internet days, got job offers via the phone or via email. And then when I turned up, they were like, holy shit. And then, why didn't you warn me? I was like, well, I didn't think it was relevant. And And so I've kept it precisely to be the kind of pink thing in the room that reminds people that what you look like has no bearing on your ability to do your job. And it astonishes me that it is 2020 and people are still concerned about the color of my hair and the fact that it might mean that I can't be taken seriously. I mean, that's sad, and tells me an awful lot more about those people than it does about me. So I guess you just get used to the looks, and you just, I don't know, just go, well, I'm just going to do it.
Earlier on, you mentioned that you don't feel like a leader. I think we think you're a leader, and clearly last night, many people do. Have you ever felt imposter syndrome? And how do you deal with it?
Like on a daily basis. And I guess it kind of it's very sad, but it's also partly keeps you grounded, maybe. I don't know, that's a really sad answer. It's really sad that we spend, especially, I guess, as women and, other kind of underrepresented groups, you end up being told from a very early age, like, what you should be like or how you should behave, or what expectations are set for you. And in really subliminal ways, like in the clothes that you're expected to wear and all that kind of stuff that send you signals about who you are that are not who you are at all. And so, it's a tricky one. It also sort of, I guess, it kind of goes with the sort of leadership thing where, for me, it was just about doing the right thing and living your values, and hoping then that people would follow you if they were the right thing to do, but not necessarily worrying if people don't. Just trying to show that you're at least doing what you think is the right thing.
So rising up, basically.
Yeah.
As Michelle Obama said, when they go low, you go high.
Yeah, that can be really, really annoying, obviously, because you just want to scream. But and it is a really weird thing. Then the kind of expectation, I guess, and I worry on a daily basis. About how I'm going to keep my lab funded and are we doing good enough science. The fact that we don't get grants that's a really, I deal with rejection every day. The awful thing about my career is that I'm paid to do science, but I'm not paid to do the science. No, that doesn't make sense. So my salary is secure, but no money to do research. So I have to raise that money. But here in New Zealand, our success rates are less than 10%. And it's not just like a random, 10% of all the grants get funded. It's usually the same people every year. So it feels for me like it's more or less 0% chance of success. But that's how I have to do that every year. And so when you write these applications and, you've put your heart and soul and you've spent weeks and weeks saying, this is the science I want to do, this is really important, please fund me, and then you get a rejection over and over and over again. It's like, it's no wonder you suffer from imposter syndrome when every day you're told you're a failure. But it's kind of because there's just not enough money in the pot to fund all the cool stuff. And for me, I guess, so the leadership part has been, well, this stuff is too important not to do, so I'm going to try and find another way. And so for me, that's been kind of crowdfunding and things. And that then sits really uncomfortably with people in my sphere because they're like, well, that's just weird. You're doing something different, right? And then they don't understand why people fund me. And it's like, well, I've spent a lot of time trying to convince people why this stuff is important, and they're happy to support me. But yeah, the imposter thing is difficult, but not at all unexpected given what you actually kind of face on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Well, we've got time for a couple of questions from the audience. Do we have anybody who would like to ask Siouxsie a question?
It is very early, don't worry.
Well, if you don't, I've got some more reserved questions. Nope, they're too slow off the mark, Siouxsie. I've got time, I think, for one more question, and then we are going to move on. So this question, New Zealand's Māori and Pasifika communities are the youngest and fastest growing ethnic groups in New Zealand and are going to play an increasingly important role in shaping our future. Yet their representation in infrastructure and no doubt health science leadership is low. How do we ensure our workplaces reflect the communities we serve?
I mean, it gets really easy. Cluster hires. Like, there have to be sufficient people that they are supported, that they have their own support networks. It cannot just be one person. So, this has to be the way that we do it, that there are really significant numbers of people brought in together as a group.
Siouxsie, thank you very much for sharing your experiences. We can and do learn a lot from you. But before we move on to our next speaker, is there one health and safety tip you would like to leave the audience today to ensure we stay at level 1 for Christmas?
Yes. Okay. So have you all heard of the Swiss cheese model? You folks must have done an infrastructure, right? So this is the idea that, so it's sort of from a health and safety perspective, I guess it's done in all sorts of things, but that every intervention you have is not perfect. So it's like a slice of Swiss cheese that's got holes in it, and that you basically layer up these slices of Swiss cheese in order to prevent something going through all the holes, right? So if we think about COVID-19 and Swiss cheese, so we've got our border controls, our managed isolation, and testing of all our border workers as slices of Swiss cheese that the government is responsible for, right? We have seen that sometimes those holes align and you can get some virus coming through. And that's why all the slices of Swiss cheese that we're responsible for, so washing our hands, using the app or keeping track of where we've been, wearing a mask, especially if you're in an enclosed space, those are the kind of slices of Swiss cheese that we can be responsible for. And if we keep doing all those things, we stop any border incursion from turning into something that requires us to basically go into kind of restrictions like lockdowns, which are quite dramatic slices of Swiss cheese, right? And so if we keep doing those things, I guess the most important one is the getting tested if you have any symptoms. Do not shrug it off as that might be hay fever, that might be whatever. Because the sooner we identify any cases that are not at the border, the sooner we can make sure that it doesn't turn into a big outbreak. Because all of the stuff we're doing like this is what turns into big outbreaks if people aren't paying attention, right? So keep using your slices of Swiss cheese. Don't get despondent when cases come through the border. This is going to happen because the virus is out of control around the rest of the world. It is going to be the next few months are going to be so weird for us here because in the Northern Hemisphere, they are heading into the most awful winter. And it's going to be hard because everyone wants to get together for Christmas and Thanksgiving and all these things, which are going to end up with huge clusters of cases. So it's going to come. And if we keep doing over all our things, then we should be able to stop moving up the alert levels. So, yeah.
So everybody, Swiss cheese it is, Swiss cheese. You'll note on your table, every single table has a little purple jar of hand sanitizer. Before you leave breakfast today, I invite you to have a lavish dose of that hand sanitizer all around the plenary hall, on every single table, and at our numerous hand sanitizers. Please be generous, help yourself. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking the fabulous, award-winning Siouxsie for joining us today.
Thank you.